Hello, everyone. I have a question for you. How are things going with respect to your relationships? Do you have a certain person in mind? If I ask you, is there anybody that you're frustrated with? Anybody that tends to kind of drive you crazy? That you almost have a love-hate relationship with? What's that about? We're going to look at that next on this edition of Journey to Healing.
Welcome to Journey to Healing. Do you find yourself discouraged, troubled, in need of healing, but not sure where to turn? John Euler, a licensed professional counselor, is here to help. John has more than 25 years of professional experience helping people deal with the issues that keep them emotionally and spiritually stuck. There is help. There is hope. There is a God who loves you and wants to help you find peace and strength. And John Euler is here to help you find that on this edition of Journey to Healing.
Well, welcome back, everyone. My name is John Euler. This is Journey to Healing. We are in the midst of an ongoing series looking at topics related to grief and loss. Topics that oftentimes are not understood that play into the issue of grief and loss. We're doing a deep dive right now into the issue of boundaries. Most people are unaware of when it comes to counseling issues, when it comes to issues that find them being stuck, as it were, oftentimes they are disconnected from the fact that on some level, somewhere, they have a relationship. They may have more than one. They have a relationship that they have not been able to be honest in. Hence, they have not been able to establish boundaries. Boundaries are simply another word for limits. And limits and boundaries depend upon the extent to which I can be honest. Honest and clear with my preferences. And we've looked at a number of things that have led up to the topic of today. And you can find those past programs on SurvivorSupport.net under podcasts. And that will help set the stage for or give you the context for what we're going to be talking about today. Because we're going to be getting into some a little more difficult concepts, or I shouldn't say concepts, but a little more difficult in terms of it may bring up some feelings in people, some emotions, and that's okay. What that means is if some of the things begin to cause what you or I, or we typically refer to as anxiety, then it's indicative that something is unsettled. It's indicative that something is going on and starting to surface. That's the time to take the time and begin to look at what is going on. One way to view the issues pertaining to psychological issues or mental health issues, psychiatric issues. When we reference psychiatry, by the way, that is in the medical domain. A psychiatrist is a medical doctor that has advanced training in brain chemistry. Most psychiatrists actually don't do much counseling, which when I went into the field, I did not know that. So if you're hoping to do regular kind of counseling, it's best to seek out a therapist rather than a psychiatrist, though there are some psychiatrists, not many though, but there are some that do counseling. But unfortunately in this day and age, there just aren't a lot. So if you go to a psychiatrist hoping to be able to talk about your problems, he or she typically won't be the right person. They'll be nice about it, hopefully, but they will refer you on because their job is to assess you medically. Because if you go through enough stuff over a long period of time, you can tax your brain chemistry. Your body can get off kilter, as it were. And so, fortunately, we live in a day and age where there is advanced medicine and pharmaceuticals. In this case, I'm appreciative of that. And so if you find yourself just kind of stuck in the mud, so to speak, emotionally, If you've been like that for a long period of time, it may be a good thing to go ahead and speak to a doctor about that. A GP is just fine as well. They may refer you on. But ultimately, you're going to need to then talk to somebody, and hopefully somebody that understands how things are put together, what makes us do the things we do. And it's one thing to speak in psychological terms. In my field, we have, in the field of psychology, we have all sorts of terms. Actually, we call them psychobabble. But the question is, underneath all of that, does the therapist understand and have a sense of how the person operates and how we're put together? So, I'll give you a hint what a decent therapist should know. A decent therapist should understand that depression, all things being equal, if it's not organic based or due to a head trauma or a degenerative illness, which is actually pretty rare. All those are pretty rare, though it's important to take family history. But oftentimes, depression is anger pushed down. You look at someone who's depressed, and where's all their energy? It's being used to push things down. Now, they are disconnected from their anger, so they won't know. And it's not necessarily their fault. They've been either taught that they shouldn't really get in touch with their emotions. They don't know what to do with their emotions. Meaning they may have, over time, begun to just not even deal with their emotions, and so they're caving in. So instead of exploding, what are they doing? They are imploding. Now, anxiety. So the two major psychiatric issues out there as far as medications go are depression and anxiety. Anxiety, if we describe it, you can look online for a list of indicators of anxiety. You can look up the DSM list of anxiety indicators. What is anxiety? Anxiety is a description of someone that's filled with adrenaline. Let me repeat that. Anxiety is the results or what we describe when someone has a bunch of adrenaline on the inside. So, though it's okay to speak in terms of anxiety, I speak in those terms, but as long as you know, and as I work with clients, I try to help them begin to reassociate the feelings of anxiety with adrenaline. So you're not so much anxious as you are adrenaline filled. Because if I tell you you have an anxiety disorder, what are you supposed to do with it? Right? The most profound kind of anxiety is what we call panic disorder or a panic attack. Some of you are familiar with that. Unfortunately, if you go to a lot of therapists, they'll tell you, well, you just need to learn how to manage that. And you have to learn how to calm yourself down. You have to learn how to meditate. You have to learn how to deep breathe. Try to bring your anxiety level down. Now, in the moment, that's true. You don't want to freak out in Walmart. If it always happens. There's something about Walmart. I'm kidding. Right? But it tends to happen like in checkout counters or someplace inconvenient. Right? And so it comes out of the blue. That's why it's so disconcerting. If someone has a panic attack, it's always out of context. Right? If you were in the ocean and you looked up and you saw a shark fin coming at you, that's a horrible thought. But if you saw that, what would you experience? You'd experience an influx of adrenaline. Understandably, the fight-flight syndrome. If you were stepping off a curb, look to your left, and all of a sudden a bus is coming at you, you'd experience the same thing, an influx of adrenaline. When we experience an influx of adrenaline, a part of us in our right brain has concluded something or has begun to tap into and therefore give information. Our left brain is in the here and now. So if I am in the here and now and I go to Walmart, I'm ready to check out, and all of a sudden I start to have this, what I term, if I'm an average person, and it's true, there's nothing wrong with the term panic attack, but let's say I start to experience a panic attack, and what is that? That is where all of a sudden my heartbeat starts to go. And again, what is anxiety? It is adrenaline. So if you were to drink 5 large Starbucks, in 15 minutes, caffeine triggers what? Triggers the adrenal glands. So what are you going to experience if you drink a bunch of coffee all of a sudden? If we were to sit together over coffee and let's say you down a bunch of coffee, probably in about 20 minutes or so, I can take the checklist out of adrenaline, or I'm sorry, of anxiety. Now I know you've had a bunch of coffee and therefore you have a bunch of adrenaline. But if I take the checklist out of anxiety and I begin to ask you, well, how are you doing as far as your thought process right now? Are you able to concentrate? You watch somebody that has a lot of adrenaline going on, they're not going to be able, they got flights of ideas, so to speak. If you were to try to go to sleep right then and there, you wouldn't be able to sleep, right? So it's going to affect your sleeping. It's probably going to affect your eating. Now, when someone is experiencing anxiety, you will find that their eating will tend to go to one of two extremes. If they do not use eating as a means of managing emotions, so emotional eating, and many emotional eaters are not aware that that's what they're doing. So if they don't tend toward food when they have anxiety, then they'll lose their appetite. You'll have a hard time being able to be calm because you've got a bunch of adrenaline going on. And then physiologically, what are you going to feel? You're going to feel a surge of what? Blood pressure. Your heart's going to start to go. Right? Right? It's going to start to beat real fast. What do we call that? We call that tachycardia. So the person having a panic attack feels their heart in their chest. It's pounding. Well, if your heart's pounding, what else is going on? You have a massive surge of blood pressure. And if you have enough blood pressure, what happens to, let's say, your eyesight? You can end up with tunnel vision. What happens in your hearing? You start to hear ringing in the ears. How about perspiration? You start to perspire. How about your breathing? So the question is this: are you anxious or do you have a bunch of adrenaline? You have a bunch of adrenaline. If I tell you you're anxious or have panic disorder, what are you supposed to do with that? All you can do is manage it. And therefore, if that's what I believe that is, if I'm a clinician, what will I try to do? I'll try to cause you to distance yourself from that anxiety. Now, again, in the moment, you need to do whatever you need to do if you're experiencing a panic attack. Okay? But if you experience a panic attack and you don't investigate what that was, I'll tell you what's going to happen. And some of you already know. If you put off investigating a panic attack, it will return. Now, I didn't just prognosticate, as far as I didn't just tell you psychologically and do a number on you. Now it's going to return because I said it's going to return. Ask anybody with panic disorder. What happens? It hits them, and then they don't know what that was about. And the first one, because it's so out of context, what do? They think they don't even know. They just knew they had to get out of Walmart. I'm going to use Walmart again as that example. Okay, but if it's a woman, she may have left her purse back in there, right? So she has to go back and retrieve it. So it was kind of a wild experience. She gets home, or he gets home, and he just tries to calm down, and that's interesting. What are they going to use? What are they going to do to try to calm themselves down? They'll tend to self-medicate in some capacity. You talk to anybody that's had a panic attack, their first one, and they didn't do internal processing. Typically. Why? Because that's what's happened, and they don't know it, by the way. Stuff was building up, and it finally came to the surface. It forced its way to the surface. So they will go back to their former or previous way of being, which is ignoring their emotions. And it could be months, could be weeks before the next one. And they're lulled into a sense of thinking that that was a weird experience and it was a fluke. It was just strange. So they've forgotten about it until one day. Now it comes up. It might be back at Walmart. It might be in a different situation. But let's say it's back in Walmart. What's going to happen? The person might start to conclude there's something connected with their panic attacks and Walmart. So what might the person do in that case? They're going to start avoiding Walmart, okay, or grocery stores, or whatever kind of place, so to speak, that is started to happen. They'll start to avoid that. Why? Because they're not a masochist. So they will start, without knowing it, they're starting to limit the freedom of movement they have in order to stay away from the pain, because they're not masochistic. Well, when they've had their second or third one, what happens? They start to think there's something going on with them, and now it's this thing that they're battling. But all they know is whenever they go out of the house, it starts. So you'll also find that eventually, little by little, where they schedule things for themselves and how much they get together with other people, eventually their lives become very, very limited. Eventually they don't go out. Eventually they stay in the house, and it keeps happening. And so you'll find that people with panic disorder also have what's called agoraphobia, fear of open places. The agora was the ancient Greek word for open air market. So they have fear of going out. Why? Because all they know is whenever they go out, what happens? It happens again. Well, how much enjoyment in life are they getting, or are they experiencing? Not much. So they're also becoming depressed. So you can have multiple diagnoses, as it were, within the realm of psychology. You can have multiple diagnoses, for each of which could be prescribed different kinds of medications. And by the way, if it gets bad enough, you need to see a doctor. But again, if you don't begin to investigate, then you will be managing these things the rest of your life. And who wants to do that? I would much rather figure out what's going on and then begin to deal with it. So if I tell you you have panic disorder, or if I tell you you just have depression, then all you can do is manage it. But if I tell you you are filled with adrenaline, now you can begin to investigate what's going on to where a part of you is in the fight-flight syndrome. When do you go into the fight-flight syndrome? When a part of you feels backed into a corner, right? I'm sort of losing control a little bit, or something's causing me to go on defense, or I'm losing control, like I'm supposed to hang on to a rope and it's starting to slip. We even say I'm losing my grip, right? So if I feel backed into a corner, and that's where boundaries come in, or if I start losing control, losing my grip, my adrenaline's going to kick in. Why? Because all I know is I have to get out of the corner. I have to start trying to do something to regain control or push back the threat. If I'm backed into a corner, how does that feel? That is an assault, as it were. That's an assault upon self. That is self-injurious. That's hurtful. The flip side of hurt is anger. Anger is designed to get my attention, to tell me that something has happened. Now, it can be self-entitlement that comes out of ego, and there's not a lot of psychoanalysis that needs to be done for that. Meaning, if I think more about myself than someone else, if I have an exaggerated sense of entitlement, if my selfishness is being given permission to have free reign, and somebody's having boundaries on me, meaning really they're pushing their boundaries back out. For instance, we've covered the topic of pigs, using that term that Jesus used in Matthew chapter 7, verse 6, that we're called to ensure we're not giving our pearls to swine. Okay. What's a pearl? It's your time, effort, energy, resources. It's that which is valuable to you. If you stop giving a pig your pearls, which you need to stop giving a pig your pearls, so that also means you need to be able to discern how big of a pig, and we have a podcast on that. Again, you can go to SurvivorSupport.net, look under the podcast tab, and you'll see a lot of these topics that we've covered. But if you notice that you have a pig in your life, you're going to have to set boundaries. If you start setting boundary against a pig, you're going to find them getting angry. Adrenaline will kick in, and so they may start to have a panic attack. So is every panic attack or all adrenaline what we call anxiety? Does that indicate that somebody's boundaries are being impinged? No, it just means somebody feels as though they're losing control or they're being backed into a corner. If a selfish person has limits being placed upon them, they will feel they're losing control and being backed into a corner. But what's happening really? They're used to expanding their territory. Think of Hitler and Lebensraum. Remember living space. You take a little kid, a little selfish kid in a sandbox. So little Johnny's going to climb in the sandbox, and little Susie's already there. Little Johnny may have his own sand toys. So let's say mom has set little Johnny up, and little Johnny, the problem is he's human, so what tends to happen? We're not satisfied, even at that age, right? So little Johnny starts to play, he looks at little Susie, and little Susie has what? She has one toy, he has 6. And what does he do? Well, she could have 2, but either way, let's say he has more, or they could have just the same, but it doesn't matter. So he has his toys, she has hers. Well, we've all sort of seen this. If you have a kid that has not been properly trained as far as breaking the will without breaking the spirit, right? That's genuine parental discipline. We have to curb the will. The last thing you want is a 2-year-old never having been curbed, because where do they go when they get big? They go into politics, isn't that true? Go into finance, or they go to prison. Prison is filled, it's the greatest compilation and collection of ego-driven individuals that say the rules don't apply to me. So little Johnny's in the sandbox, he looks over at little Susie. We've all seen that look, right? He looks and he kind of looks around maybe, or he's fixated on it, and what does he do? He's going to help himself. Now he can do it subtly, depending upon the intelligence level of the kid. Well, in one way or another, he's going to acquire Susie's toy. So he could work for the IRS. But anyways, he acquires, or he's a little socialist. Oh gosh, it's true, right? But if you take something that's not yours at the threat of force, then you're either a criminal or you work in government, and you're gonna take it. That's very true, right? Socialism means what I have is mine and what's yours is mine. And if you tell me no, then I'm going to say there's all sorts of names, and we can. I'll tell you not to be so selfish, right? I'm going to distribute your toys to other people, but I'm going to take my cut. So, but little Johnny goes over, takes Susie's toy. What does Susie do? The flip side of hurt, she's been negatively impacted. The flip side of hurt is anger. She's experiencing anger. Now, hopefully there's a parent to kind of watch this, because now the parent, the authority, is going to do what? They're going to intervene, and they're going to make sure the injustice is corrected. So they're going to give back to Susie what is rightfully hers, her personal property. So Johnny transgressed a real but invisible boundary. It wasn't so much that the parent, though they could do this, draw a line in the sand and says, do not cross. That probably won't happen at first. If it continues, one of the parents might draw that line in the sand and say what? Don't cross that line. That's now a boundary. That's a visible indication of what we already feel on the inside, because we are valuable. And if somebody transgresses against us, if somebody sins against us, they are taking something from us. They are stealing. So little Johnny takes these toys. Little Susie's going to feel this. And depending upon what happens, if Johnny gets away with it, Johnny begins to learn what? That he can get away with it, and he doesn't have to listen to his conscience, even at a young age. Little Susie feels this, and what does her body go into? The little fight-flight syndrome, because her toy was just taken. So she's going to, the flip side of hurt is anger. And so once, even a little child, once they go into the fight-flight syndrome, once they feel anger, what does their little body produce? It produces adrenaline. Now, kids experience it immediately. We actually do too, but their emotions, they tend to wear them on their sleeves. They haven't been necessarily trained to deal with their emotions properly, but typically they're in touch with their emotions. So what's going to happen? That adrenaline's going to kick in, and that's designed to help little Susie do something about her boundaries and what was just taken. Now, if a parent comes up and says, Johnny, give the toy back. Let's say little Susie was already crying, so we have some distress going on. The toy now is returned to its rightful owner, but what's little Johnny going to do? He may start pitching a fit. Why? Because he's angry. So what's going on in his body? Adrenaline. So now the question is what? Is which adrenaline is right? The body's just doing what the body does. But little Johnny has an exaggerated sense of entitlement. Now I understand we're talking about kids, but still, he felt his need superseded little Susie's. He was not content. So you can have two people that are filled with adrenaline, but for one of two reasons. Johnny will be filled with adrenaline. Now let's transport Johnny 20 years into the future. So we have an adult who somebody sets limits on him. How's he going to respond? Well, adrenaline's kicking in, and he's going to feel anxiety. Transport Susie 20 years into the future. As a matter of fact, let's say Susie and Johnny now, maybe they remember each other, maybe they don't, but they're out on a date. Now they're in a car driving home. And now Johnny suggests they go to her place. And maybe Johnny starts to do what? And Susie starts to look at him, and she says no, and Johnny says, but I paid for dinner. That happens all the time, by the way. If Johnny has allowed himself to be self-entitled, Johnny's going to do what? If Susie has been told that she can't have boundaries, then what's going to be the outcome? And that happens all the time. So the flip side of hurt is anger. If he gets his way, he won't be angry. But if she is violated, what is she going to experience? She will experience anxiety, and she'll experience depression, all of which come down to anger. Why? Because her boundaries were infringed upon. Somebody crossed her boundaries. She has to begin to find out what happened, because let's say that happened as a child. Let's say at age 6, and let's say Johnny was an older cousin by 10 years older, maybe a stepdad. There's a lot of different situations. So if a young person was violated, as a matter of fact, hopefully this will be helpful. If you have a child, if you have a young person prior to the age of puberty, referencing that they may be bisexual, pansexual, there's all sorts of terms now. If a minor references anything to do with sexuality, that they're wrestling with their sexuality, you can be assured of this. Their sexual boundaries have been crossed. Somebody's been grooming them. It can be as simple as we live in a porn-saturated culture as far as society, but somewhere along the lines, somebody has groomed them, somebody's manipulated them, and now they've confused them. So if you have a young person or a young adult that is gender confused, rest assured, the place to begin to start to help them, and if I'm speaking to you and you've experienced gender confusion, begin to think in terms of how did the confusion come about? And more than likely, you're going to begin to think about and maybe realize that somewhere along the lines, somebody crossed your boundaries, somebody manipulated you sexually, somebody groomed you, and therefore the confusion arose because of that boundary violation. So there's nothing wrong with your gender. You were not born in the wrong body. You have a lot of hurt from somebody taking advantage of you. And many of the girls, by the way, in the trans movement, as they want to become guys, what is that all about? To a very large extent, that is them attempting to say, you know what, if that's what that is, if I have to perform that kind of stuff, or if I keep getting assaulted, then I don't want to be a girl anymore. And they begin to try to erase themselves. They begin to try to distance themselves from that part of themselves that they believe is the magnet that attracts all these predators, quite frankly. So the answer is not sterilizing kids through pharmaceuticals, it is not chopping off body parts. It is healing, it is going back and trying to figure out where did the boundary violations come from. By doing so, by beginning to look at what happened in the past, we'll be in a much better position to be able to heal those past wounds, and then we'll be able to look at what is happening in the current day that may be preventing me from, setting up our commercial here in just a moment. But what's preventing me from being able to have my voice now and being able to have my boundaries, being able to have my preferences, because I have to be able to have those. We're going to look at some of the most profound things that actually hinder someone from being able to, in the current day, being able to heal and being able to put effective boundaries, establish those boundaries. We're going to look at what are some of the most challenging issues on the other side of the break.
Are you or someone you know a survivor of abuse and wondering where to turn for trustworthy help and insight into the effects of such abuse? Ever wish you had access to a resource that could help you continue your progress in healing? SurvivorSupport.net is that resource. Developed by John Euler, a seasoned therapist with years of experience working with sexual abuse survivors, SurvivorSupport.net is a one-of-a-kind resource to help you understand the impact of abuse and to help you understand the nature of those who harmed you in order to help you gain clarity and continue healing. If you are interested in speaking with John Euler about your situation or in having John conduct a consultation or a training for your church or organization, SurvivorSupport.net serves as a convenient method of contacting him. Our program, Journey to Healing, is made possible through the generous donations of viewers like you. There are many opportunities and needs that Survivor Support is attempting to meet, and your monthly support or one-time gift would be extremely helpful as we seek to meet those needs and opportunities. Simply visit SurvivorSupport.net and you will see the link to donate on the homepage. We thank you.